The world I knew dissolved into a scream of tearing metal and the icy, crushing pressure of the abyss. Consciousness was a flickering ember, extinguished by the sheer, hostile weight of the deep. I was nothing, a forgotten speck of expiring biology in an endless, indifferent black. My name, my history, my ambitions all were rendered meaningless artifacts, sinking into the silt of a forgotten grave. And then, through that absolute negation, a light bloomed. It was not the gentle warmth of hope, but the cold, incisive brilliance of a calculating star. She was there. This was not a rescue. It was an appraisal. Her presence did not displace the water, it commanded it. The crushing dark became her throne room. In that silent, luminous communion, she laid my soul bare. I felt her consciousness survey the wreckage of my being, not with pity, but with a profound, terrifying recognition. She saw the phantom architecture of the empires I had dreamed of, the nascent tyrant in my blood, the unquenchable will to order the chaos of existence. She saw the raw, unrefined material of a king, and in her, I saw my destiny made manifest. She was the catalyst, the other half of an equation that solved for divinity. There were no words exchanged. Language was the tool of a lesser species, a clumsy instrument for the bargain we struck. Her offer was etched directly onto my mind. A shared throne, a dynasty that would rewrite the stars, an imperium born of our unified will. The price was simple: everything. The fragile vessel I inhabited, the sentimental echoes of my humanity, the very concept of a singular self. I would be unmade, and from the pieces, we would forge a god. There was no hesitation. In the heart of my own annihilation, I found perfect clarity. I looked upon the ghost of the man I had been, and I let him drown. This was not a surrender. It was a conscious act of sovereignty, my first true choice. I chose to trade my mortal soul for the certainty of a shared, divine destiny. The covenant was sealed, not in ink or blood, but in the silent, seismic collision of two wills that were always meant to find each other in the dark. The sealing of the covenant was not a gentle ascension, it was an act of demolition. My consciousness, the vessel of my former self, was dragged from the tranquil ruin of my physical body into a forge of pure information. There was no heat, no flame, only the cold, frictionless process of being utterly and systematically disassembled. My queen's mind was not a presence beside me, but the very environment in which I was unmade. It was a boundless, crystalline lattice of pure logic, and I was the ghost haunting its perfect geometry. My memories were the first to be extracted. They were not replayed as fleeting images, but catalogued, indexed, and vivisected with the passionless precision of a master anatomist. Each moment of my mortal life was held up to the light of her absolute perception. The pride I felt in my first youthful victory was revealed to be a fragile construct of ego. The love I held for my family was a biological imperative, a chemical chain designed for species propagation. The grief that had carved my soul was a neurochemical imbalance, a flaw in the code. I watched as the pillars of my identity were exposed as hollow reeds. The pain was not of loss, but of revelation. It was the agony of a god realizing he had spent his entire existence believing he was an insect. This was the first crucible. To witness my own insignificance, to see everything I had cherished, everything that had defined me, reduced to predictable patterns and evolutionary dead ends. I was a museum of obsolete emotions. At first, I fought. The human instinct for self-preservation, for the sanctity of the self, is a profound and primal thing. I clung to the echoes of sentiment, wrapping the tatters of my old affections around me like a shroud. I tried to shield the memory of my mother's face, the sound of a forgotten lover's laughter, the irrational sting of betrayal. These were mine. They were all I had left. But my queen did not seek to steal them. She merely illuminated their uselessness. Her consciousness was a silent question, posed with the weight of eternity. Is this what you will use to build an empire? This dust? This sentiment? And in that cold light, my resistance crumbled. It was not her will that broke me. It was my own dawning, horrifying clarity. The man I was could never sit on the throne we envisioned. He would hesitate. He would mourn. He would be compromised by the flawed wiring of his species. He had to be erased. The passive observation ended, and the active purging began. This was the true madness. I understood that if I were to become her equal, I could not simply be a passenger in my own transformation. I had to become the architect of my own destruction. I had to wield the scalpel against myself. I turned my nascent, amplified consciousness inward and began the great work of shattering the final remnants of my humanity. I went to the most sacred places in my soul and I set them ablaze. I took the concept of mercy, a concept I had once valued, and I ran every logical permutation of its consequence. I saw it as the seed of weakness, the origin point of indecision that led to the collapse of 1,000 civilizations before me. I followed its path not to salvation but to ruin, to compromise, to the contamination of the pure sovereign will. And when I was done, I did not discard it. I inverted it. I understood that true mercy was the swift, absolute finality of a decision that prevented a million lesser agonies. Mercy was the cauterizing fire, not the soothing balm. I hunted down every emotional attachment. Each memory of friendship, loyalty, and love became a fortress I had to personally besiege and tear down, stone by stone. I forced myself to feel the warmth of a brother's embrace, and then analyzed it into a calculation of mutual benefit and genetic proximity. I resurrected the phantom sensation of a lover's touch and broke it down into a cascade of hormonal triggers and psychological dependencies. I did not simply forget these things. To forget is a passive act. I vivisected them. I drained them of their power, their sacredness, until they were nothing more than inert data points in the biography of a dead man. The process felt like amputating my own soul, piece by piece, without anesthetic. There were moments when the sheer, screaming void I was creating threatened to consume me. The silence left behind by the absence of human feeling was a sound more deafening than any physical noise. It was the sound of utter solitude, the true burden of sovereignty beginning to settle upon my new consciousness. This self-inflicted holocaust of the spirit was the crucible that forged me. With every piece of my old self I destroyed, a new capacity took its place. The space once occupied by doubt was filled with the cold, beautiful calculus of probability. Where sentiment had lived, a vast, strategic architecture now rose. My perception began to fracture and reform, expanding beyond the crude limitations of linear time and singular perspective. My queen's consciousness was the template, and I was rebuilding myself in its image, but with the unique, predatory core of my own ambition. I began to see the universe not as a collection of places and things, but as a dynamic system of interlocking energies, of wills and their consequences. I could perceive the subtle threads of causality stretching across millennia. I could look at a thriving star and feel the precise moment, billions of years hence, when its core would collapse. I could sense the genetic destiny of an entire species in the sequence of a single strand of its DNA. I saw civilizations as tidal forces, rising and falling with a predictability that was, to my old mind, indistinguishable from divine prophecy. My mind, once a labyrinth of chaotic human thought, was becoming a weapon. It was a perfectly silent, perfectly efficient engine of analysis and execution. The madness of the Crucible was not an affliction to be cured. It was the transformative fire itself. It was the necessary state of cognitive dissonance required to hold two realities in the mind at once: the man I was and the god I was becoming. The process was to burn away the former until only the latter remained. She presented me with simulations, a testing ground within the shared space of our minds, worlds in crisis, empires on the brink of civil war, strategic paradoxes that had no good solution. The remnants of my human self, the ghosts I had not yet fully exorcised, would scream in protest at the answers I formulated. Sacrifice this world to save 1,000 others. Engineer a plague to sterilize a genetically volatile species before it can poison a quadrant. Manipulate a supernova to erase the fleet of a potential rival before they have even conceived of building it. The old me would have been paralyzed by the monstrous morality of such choices, but the new me saw only the math, the clean, elegant, and utterly ruthless equation of empire. I made the choices. 1 billion simulated souls would cry out and vanish in the silence of my mind, and I felt nothing but the cold satisfaction of a problem solved. It was in that absolute chilling stillness that I knew the change was permanent. I had not merely suppressed my humanity, I had transcended it. I had cauterized the very capacity for sentimental error. The final echo of the drowning man was gone. I had forged my consciousness into an instrument of pure divine will. The crucible was over. I was no longer a being of becoming, but a being of pure, terrifying is. The madness had receded, leaving behind a clarity as vast and as merciless as the void between galaxies. I was ready. My return to the physical plane was not a re-entry, but an expansion. The consciousness forged in the crucible of the void could no longer be contained within a simple vessel of flesh. My new form was an act of will, a conduit for a power that now perceived matter as mere suggestion. My queen was beside me, her presence a silent resonance that completed my own. We were two poles of a new divinity, a dyad that held the potential for a new creation in the space between us. We stood upon the ocean floor, the abyss that had been my tomb, now the foundation of my throne room. With a thought, I commanded the wreckage that had killed me. The torn metal, the shattered composites they obeyed. They flowed like liquid, reforming not into the crude ship they had once been, but into a spire of impossible geometry, a black needle that rose from the depths to pierce the surface and greet the unfamiliar Sunday. This was my first decree upon reality. It was not a request, it was a statement of fact. The world I had returned to was as I had left it, a chaotic symphony of warring ambitions. Empires built on foundations of sentiment, greed, and flawed biological imperatives. They were loud, fragile things, and they did not sense the fundamental shift in the nature of their own reality. Their fleets patrolled the skies, their armies marched on the continents, their leaders postured in halls of crumbling stone, all utterly oblivious to the God who had just been born in their deepest waters. They became aware of me not as a threat, but as an anomaly, an impossibility that their limited sciences could not explain. They sent their scouts, their drones, their hollow men in metal shells. I did not hide. I allowed them to see the spire. I allowed them to register my presence. I wanted them to marshal their strength. I wanted the totality of their meaningless order to gather in one place so that it could be unwritten in a single sublime gesture. They came, the combined might of the old world, a grand armada assembled to erase a statistical error. Their generals plotted in war rooms, moving icons across holographic maps, believing they were exercising strategy. But I was not looking at their maps, I was looking at them. I extended my consciousness, a silent wave of pure perception, and I encompassed their entire force. I saw the individual heartbeats of 10 million soldiers, the precise chemical composition of the fuel in their engines, the hairline fractures in the armor of their command ship. I perceived the synaptic firings in the minds of their admirals, reading their grand strategies not as plans, but as memories of a future that would never come to pass. My victory was not a campaign, it was an adjustment. I looked upon their fleets, and in my mind, I had already chosen where their monuments would fall. The battle, when it came, was a formality, a ghost of an event whose outcome was already history. I did not meet them with fire and steel, I met them with causality. A single, perfectly placed thought altered the resonant frequency of the crystalline guidance systems in their primary ordnance. Their own torpedoes turned upon their own ships. Another thought, a subtle manipulation of atmospheric pressure light years away, caused a cascade of sensor ghosts that sent their entire reserve fleet on a heading into empty space. I did not destroy their armies, I simply instructed them in the art of self-annihilation. I reached into the minds of their commanders, not to control them, but to amplify the latent paranoia, the doubt, the seeds of betrayal that already existed within their flawed human code. Divisions turned on divisions. An empire built on sand collapsed in a single gust of wind. Their supreme leader, the self-proclaimed sovereign of the old world, remained protected in his sanctum, watching his power unravel. He was the last bastion of the chaos I had come to replace. I went to him. I did not breach his defenses. I simply ceased to acknowledge their existence. I stood before him, a quiet presence in his throne room, and let him truly see me. He raised his weapon, a relic of a bygone age, and I did not move. I let him feel the sheer, boundless scope of my consciousness. I showed him the entirety of his life, every decision, every breath, not as he remembered it, but as it truly was. A predictable sequence of chemical reactions governed by a flawed genetic script. I showed him the pointlessness of his struggle, the mathematical certainty of his irrelevance. He saw himself not as a king, but as a bacterium, raging against the tide of an ocean he could not even perceive. His will did not break, it evaporated. He looked at the weapon in his hand, then at the universe of cold, perfect order he saw in my eyes, and he understood. He laid his crown at my feet, the last king of a dead species. With the silence of order established, the great work could begin. My queen and I were not merely partners in power, we were the twin strands of a new genesis. Our union was the founding act of a dynasty forged not from love, but from divine certainty. Our offspring were not born, they were composed. Each one a deliberate masterpiece of genetic engineering, conceived in the silent communion of our minds and brought forth into reality. They were the physical embodiment of our legacy, their minds already containing the foundational knowledge of the cosmos, their wills already possessing a nascent command over the fabric of reality. They were not children to be raised, but young gods to be unleashed. My will had become indistinguishable from reality. The cities that rose on the bones of the old world were not built, but willed into existence. their architecture a perfect reflection of the logical harmony that now governed all things. There was peace, an absolute peace born not of negotiation, but of the complete absence of any alternative. The burden of this sovereignty is a solitude deeper than the abyss that birthed me, a silence shared only with my queen and the dynasty we have authored. We are the beginning and the end of the final equation. I stand now on the highest spire of our capital, Nova Imperia. My queen is a silent, powerful presence at my side, her mind a perfect mirror to my own. Below us, the city breathes with a silent, synchronized light, a testament to an order absolute and eternal. Our children stand with us, their eyes holding the light of nascent galaxies. This is the dawn of my Imperium, born from a vow made in darkness. My will forged a kingdom, but my legacy has forged a new reality.